Well, good evening to everybody, and welcome to the September webinar. It's kind of hard to believe that it's September already, but it definitely is. And so tonight, hopefully some of you saw the email that I've made an executive decision to based on the news, to change up the topic of tonight's webinar. Obviously, what's dominated the news is the dropping of the leaked John Doe documents from the Guardian newspaper in the UK, although it was the American branch of the Guardian that released the documents. So it's been all over the news. There have been responses from both sides, and I've got some of those tonight. And I thought it would be really good to take a look at the issue of John Doe. And since we kind of only see it through one lens, to give us an idea of how to more progressively communicate ideas about that John Doe investigation. And seeing as tonight is the eve of Fighting Bob Fest, so we're going to be joined by Fighting Bob tonight. He will be popping in and supervising our event tonight a little bit. So there you go. So relax, enjoy. On your screen, on the YouTube page there, you have a comments box that has a little comment, and you click on it to send a comment, or they have the emoticons, so if you're feeling a certain way about something, you can communicate that. So feel free to use that, and I'll see that pop up as we go. So that's pretty much it. So let's get started and take a look here. That if you haven't read the entire Guardian investigation, I would strongly recommend it. Anything that you saw in the media, state media, like Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, Wisconsin State Journal, Capital Times, that kind of local newspaper, or even the AP, really gave a consolidated version of the story. And the Guardian story was fantastic because not only was it really thorough in giving background on the John Doe, where it is in the legal proceedings right now, but also named a lot of the players and actually had interactive text and pictures that you can look at the specific emails that they're referencing. You can look at pictures of checks that were written to Club for Growth Wisconsin that said because Scott Walker said so in the memo. So it really gives you a sense of the whole story that none of us have ever seen before. So there's the link right there. You'll be able to get that link when I post this PowerPoint presentation online tomorrow. So you'll be able to go right to the link there, and that'll take you right to the interactive Guardian page. So this morning, as it turns out, Scott Walker was on Charlie Sykes' radio show. Surprise, surprise. And he was actually the first guest right at 8:35. And there's a link there for you to listen to the archive. And I would strongly recommend listening to that interview, because it actually, Sykes actually asks Walker a lot of the questions that have been around the media over the last 24 hours about the lead paint pay-for-play legislation scheme, about the leaked documents themselves, about the legal status of the of the case and all that kind of thing. And although he gives Walker free rein to message it as he pleases, it does show what the actual on-message response is for conservatives and for Republicans. So I would, unfortunately you can't download the MP3 from the WTMJ website. So if you want to listen, you can just go to the archive and listen there. So on your screen, you're going to see these are kind of the top 5 points that Walker made in about a 15-minute interview. So the first thing he said was that it fits the liberal media agenda. This goes along with the conservative consistent message that the media has a liberal bias. So that's number one. So the next one is really important because he said the courts have shut this baseless investigation down and that nothing illegal was done by him or anybody else. So this is a really important quote to remember because we're going to look at it in a little more depth. The third one is that they, meaning the plaintiffs who had been investigating the John Doe case and brought it to the legal system, that they lost this in the legal system, right? They lost it, so now what they're trying to do is to try the case in the court of public opinion, since they lost in the legal system. That's another really important comment. The next one is, he asked him about this whole lead paint pay-for-play scheme, and if you don't know the story, basically a now deceased owner of a company that manufactured a lot of lead-based paint and was on the hook for a bunch of lawsuits, was a huge donor to the Walker campaign through the Club for Growth, and after a visit from Walker wrote this huge check. And then of course in that legislative session, here comes this bill that was enacted into law and was actually set aside by higher courts, that these lead paint manufacturers could not be liable for damages even predating things that were already in the system, in the court system. So it would have nullified existing decisions. So obviously that piece of legislation that had been enacted into law has been since overturned by the courts, but nonetheless it raises the whole question of pay for play, quid pro quo. I give you a check for $75,000, I get the legislation I want. And then in regard to that whole lead paint thing, he said, look, what people are actually surprised at is that we did what we promised to do, that we would reform the legal system. We've been promising we would do this for over a decade, and that when we reformed the legal system, it made Wisconsin open for business again. Right? So think of that in terms of framing, that we did what we promised to do, and that is we would make Wisconsin open for business again. And then the final, really big highlighted comment was getting into this idea about the leaked documents themselves. And this whole frame, this whole message that the person who leaked the documents had to be from the prosecution team, had to be somebody from within the case, and the person that did that broke the law. That they had no legal basis. In fact, the court had ordered them sealed. They were still under seal. They were supposed to be in the custody of the court, not to be released, and the person who leaked those documents broke the law. So very important points there. So the question I have for you, being all the studious people and intelligent people that you are, and being up on framing, right? What's the message that we just saw there? Feel free to comment in the chat box or to yourself, or maybe take down some notes. But clearly what Walker did in going on the Sykes program was obviously not to answer hard questions, was not to say, geez, I messed up, something like that. He was out there to establish the frame for how this is going to go down over the coming months. And as you can well imagine, it's not a very heavy lift because the conservative frame is dominant in our public discourse. So, what's the message coming from Walker? And I've actually set up a slide here that kind of gives us the foundation, and if you have other thoughts, feel free to put them in there. But if you look at his quotes in the italics and then kind of what the values are, he evoked very strong conservative values. The first one, obviously, you've been hearing this for decades, that there's a liberal media bias. And again, we can all point to the facts, and there's a lot of facts out there to say that there's no media bias towards progressives or liberals. In fact, more airtime goes to conservatives. And obviously, they're out there just to get out a message. So clearly, there is no media bias towards liberals or progressives. But again, facts are really secondary to this whole concept of liberal bias in the media. So that's well accepted in public discourse. So the next thing he says is that the courts have shut this baseless system, this baseless investigation down. Nothing illegal was done. What he's really saying there is that, look, I'm the moral authority figure. They investigated everything, and of course, they found that I didn't do anything illegal because what I do is legal. It's moral. It is what the authoritarian figure is supposed to do. And the investigation being baseless means that it was actually an illegitimate attack against his moral authority, against Walker's moral authority. So in the minds of conservatives, and even unconsciously in the minds of most people, this is a very powerful statement because it reinforces his position as a moral authority, and therefore his actions are presumed legal. So then we get to this idea. That's a good comment there. Taking strong measures to open up the state economy, did nothing, and the leaker did an illegal act. That's exactly what they're getting at. And this next comment that he made about them losing in the legal system, and they're trying the case in public opinion. Look, what he's saying is they lost, right? They're a bunch of bad losers. They're whiny, weak, undisciplined babies who are now trying to get their way by going to the media, the liberal biased media. And here's what's most important. They have no respect for the law, right? So the comment there that they followed the law, that the prosecutors aren't. And worse yet, that these prosecutors have no respect for the law. That's important. Because that goes right into the next point of this whole lead paint thing, that they did what they promised to do, reform the legal system, make Wisconsin open for business. And what he's saying is, look, what I did was, and yes, in spite of the fact that we always quantify them, we describe them as being sneaks and cowards, what they're really saying there is, look, I had a morally just mission. My mission was just. I did what I promised to do, and that was to be successful in opening the free market. Getting government out of people's lives, getting government out of corporate life, making sure that the market was open for everyone. That's what we promised to do. That's what we did, and that was a morally just mission. Which in the conservative frame it is. We all know that. And he kept his promise. So he did what he said he was going to do. Right? And then, so that sets up the whole frame of Walker, again, being morally just, the people who did what they set out to do, and what about the people that leaked the documents? Right? They broke the law. No respect for law and order. Right? Think of Nixon, the law and order president. Walker wants to, wants to frame himself as being the law and order governor. And then those prosecutors are morally undisciplined. So really, really heavy framing going on here on the part of, not only Scott Walker, but, this is going to be repeated for the rest of the time this is in the news cycle. And what I would encourage you to do is really keep an eye on the news and see how this is playing out in terms of framing. Is this being repeated over and over? Is it being reinforced? Or is there another frame to counter it out there? Which, by chance, is exactly what I want to look at right now. And there was a press conference held yesterday during the 12:30 hour, and it was carried live on WISI. And thanks to WISI, I was able to download an MP4 here that gave us this is actually highlights of the press conference. So you're going to hear, this is about a 2-minute clip of the Democratic response, and then we're gonna take a look at that. And obviously during the response, as you listen to it here, that's a great comment, right? If I can do this for me, right, if I can do this for myself as governor and for the people of Wisconsin, imagine what I can do for you, right, in terms of give me your money and I'll do what you need me to do. So let's take a look at the video here, and I think you'll find this really interesting.
I grew up in a family of lawyers, and I'm an attorney myself, and I grew up respecting the law, looking at statutes, thinking of the wisdom that went into the statutes and what the law means and should mean. But it appears today that there may not be policy reflected in our laws in this state, at least coming from the Republican side of the aisle. It appears that we have more payback than policy that's being reflected in our statutes.
So now we know when Gogebic Taconite, the mining company that donated $700,000 to Republicans and then had a bill passed shortly after, now we know why they donated. It's because Scott Walker asked. Now we know, at least it appears that we know, why in the 2011 legislative session they tried to pass a lead paint bill, and in the 2013-15 budget they passed it through Motion 999. Now we know it's because Scott Walker asked. We have emails that show that the governor, quote, is encouraging all to invest in the Wisconsin Club for Growth, and they can accept corporate donations, end quote. Now we know this legislative session, we asked repeatedly, we stood over and over and over again in this room, why is it that Republican legislators in the Senate and Assembly, led by Governor Walker in many cases, are spending more time focusing on keeping their jobs and helping themselves with keeping their jobs than on helping their constituents with their jobs? Why is that? Well, now we know.
Okay, so back to me here for a minute after the video. So yeah, you can go to WISI and watch the whole press conference. It was about 15-20 minutes long, and you saw primarily the leadership from the state assembly there giving some highlights of their response to these John Doe release. And I just want to comment. What's interesting was so these are prepared remarks. These are not off-the-cuff remarks. And I'm hoping that you heard some things that were interesting that would have caught your attention in terms of what the meaningful phrases were there. So the first one that caught my attention was the first thing that Peter Barkas said, who's the minority leader in the assembly. He said something that he was stunned to hear the news in the morning. These are incredibly, potentially damaging allegations, right? And the first time I heard that, I thought, wow, that's not really a very strong statement. Potentially allegations, and yeah, there's a good comment there in the box, from Mark saying this whole Scott Walker ask thing and how to turn around, and hold that thought because we're going to get to it. The second one, after hearing Walker on Charlie Sykes this morning talking about how the prosecutors haven't respected the law, Dana Wachs is another kind of up-and-coming leader in the assembly who's from the western Wisconsin area. He said that he grew up in a family of lawyers respecting the law. So, okay. So that's an interesting statement there. And then Katrina Shanklin had several statements where she they were obviously trying to play on this whole because Scott Walker asked meme, right? Saying Gogibik Takanite donated because Scott Walker asked. And the lead paint bill was passed because Scott Walker asked. And she kind of ends with this question about why is the legislature more interested in helping themselves with their jobs than helping their constituents with their jobs, right? And as I'm saying that, like, Fighting Bob is kind of shaking his head, because we need to start asking ourselves, what would Fighting Bob say? And one of the things that I'm going to do with the Thinking Points Journal tomorrow is I'm going to go over kind of some really great phrases from Fighting Bob historically, because you would never hear Fighting Bob say something like this, and there's a reason. And I'm wondering, I'm going to ask a question. I think that for everybody on here, that this is a rhetorical question. When I ask what frame you're hearing the assembly leadership evoke, and that's not to say I'm not picking on anybody. Look, these are prepared comments. They are doing what conventional wisdom says they should do. They are responding, and they are attacking Scott Walker as they think is the best way to do it, since that's the way they've been doing it all along. So I'm not saying that what they did is intentionally wrong, is somehow, they're not bad people. They're just historically, they've been doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. So, when I saw that, I made some notes here that I'm going to now share with you. And yeah, exactly. Meth is potentially dangerous, as is, right. That's exactly the message, right? We're not Scott Walker, and we're going to continue to attack Scott Walker because we're not him, and then maybe someday that'll work. But when you look at the frame that, let's look deeper in here, because we want to help make things better here, is the first one, this idea of incredibly potentially damaging allegations in the news. Right? There's too many weak qualifiers there, and it's reinforcing this legal authority frame. When you talk about potential allegations, right, you're reinforcing that frame that these were all dismissed. He didn't do anything wrong. They're just allegations in the news, in the liberal media, right? So that one gets C minus minus in terms of messaging effectiveness. The next one from Representative Walk saying, look, I grew up in a family of lawyers. We learned to respect law. Well, we kind of get what he was saying. What he was saying is this whole pay-for-play thing is wrong, right? But he didn't communicate why it's morally wrong. He said, respect the rule of law. And what does that do? Again, reinforces authority. Quick drink break. So let's just look at the next two together. The Gogibik Takanite donated because Walker asked, and the lead paint bill was passed because Walker asked. Look, when you think you're attacking someone and you try to use their own words against them, that's the kind of thing that works for a Jon Stewart or a Stephen Colbert or a John Oliver, or a Jim Jeffries, somebody who's a very smart and savvy comedian who's known to be satirical. So have the frame, the context of that satire. For a sitting legislator to try to use their words against them. Look, what all they're doing is they're evoking the Walker frame, right? They're using his name. They are evoking the authoritarian self-interest frame that, yeah, it was smart for Gogibik Takanite to donate because Scott Walker asked, because as the comment in the comment box says, I'll get things done for you, right? I'm going to open up Wisconsin for business for you, which goes right to the next, the next quote there, about why is the legislature more interested and yes, they are talking like lawyers. They're not talking like people, right? So they're not communicating to the people. It's almost like they're talking amongst themselves. But this whole idea of why the legislature isn't more interested in why is the legislature more interested in helping themselves in their jobs than constituents? Well, right, here is what unconsciously people are thinking, right? If the job they're doing is morally right by creating jobs and doing what Walker says and making Wisconsin open for business, right, then they are helping constituents with their jobs. And there is the danger in making something about hardworking people or people with jobs, right? You start to corner yourself into the job creation frame, and if what you are doing is morally right, then you are helping people with their jobs. So again, conventional wisdom says, yeah, this stuff is going to be effective. But we know, and what should be understood is what we've seen over the last 5 years. Yeah, this would be, I would guess that John Oliver somebody's going to pick this up. It's too big of a story. Colbert, Oliver, somebody's going to pick it up. So, when you adhere to the attacking conventional wisdom, that's what happens. And what I want to get to right now is, what can we do about it? I mean, we can write letters in the progressive frame, not only to papers, but to these legislators, and try and show them that there's a better way to communicate this stuff. We can start, talking to our groups about these nonpartisan progressive values that are on the screen that, you've all seen a bunch of times, but, they're good to get out there and talk about. Because, again, as you see from these press conferences, this stuff doesn't get communicated. So I have some ideas here, and I'm open to more suggestions from the peanut gallery here. Is how do these values specifically apply, right? And yeah, they should have said this is wrong and why it's wrong. And so these 4 points echo each. Here, I'll go back to the slide. So each value here, 1 through 4, these value statements, okay, each one of these responses or comments about the Doe situation apply to 1 through 4 respectively, right? So here's the first idea, and see what you think of this, right? So these corporations, and the wealthy people who are contributing to Walker, right? They wouldn't prosper and be free with the wealth that they have without all the things that we did for them as an investment in our state, right? It's called taxes, right? What we invest in each other and in the state is something that they prosper from. They have wealth because of that. They are free because of that, right? So they wouldn't exist without us, with the public to provide that infrastructure, the framework, right? So don't they have a moral responsibility to all of us to act for the public good, not in their greedy self-interest? And yeah, that's a good comment. Yeah, somebody hit the nail on the head there. Right, that they're concerned while not alienating their corporate donors. Right, spot on. But this would take, right, to that point, this first sentence would take a lot of courage to say, so I think that's important. So now the second one, right, so this idea that people, the only way our democracy will succeed is when people act with empathy towards each other, right? So this is where we get into the whole idea of greed and self-interest. That the greed motivating these people, motivating their actions, on the part of Scott Walker and Scott Walker himself, it's destroying democracy and hurting people like us. Right? We should start calling again, the corporate robber barons again. Start, renew that phrase again. The wealthy corporate robber barons, and it's destroying our democracy and it's hurting people like us. Right? And we have just scores and scores of facts to back that up. So, really important value statement there. So the next one, the third one, is this idea that, our state and the people are hurting because these greedy politicians and these greedy corporations who, they don't care about us. They only care about their own self-interest. That gets to the moral responsibility thing. And believe me, there's more people than less who think that we should take care of each other, that we should be a community, that it's part of our heritage. Finally, just cutting right to the chase, that these elected officials who took part in these schemes, that these greedy self-interest schemes, that they only care about their own self-interest, not people like us. And you're saying to yourself, there are some themes here, right? There are some common themes that I'm hearing repeated, and that's good, right? Because what embeds frames, what embeds messages into people's brains, what makes them stick in public discourse? It's repetition, right? That's why you heard Walker saying the same thing over and over again, right? So I want to distill this down because this is where it gets kind of where the rubber meets the road, to coin a metaphor, of what we can do with some key ideas. So there's 4 up here, and again, they are consistent with the 4 value statements, the nonpartisan value statements that both Republicans and Democrats can agree with. So first one, prosperity and freedom wouldn't exist with all the things we've done together. Simple, easy, right? You hear Elizabeth Warren say that kind of thing all the time. Second, greed and self-interest are destroying our democracy. Right? This kind of gets to where Bernie Sanders got so many people motivated to participate in democracy again, because he got people to believe that the more people that participated, we could actually make a difference. Right? That's a positive, hopeful message that we can make a difference and take back our democracy. The third one is this idea that the greedy politicians and the greedy corporations, who should have a sense of moral responsibility based on that first idea. They only care about their own self-interest, not people like us. And they are people like all of us. There's nobody on this webinar, I'm sure, who could write a check to any politician tomorrow for $500,000. And those were the kind of checks that they were seeing. And obviously, it served their self-interest for both the people who cut the checks and the politicians. And that betrays our trust that we put to them. So the final one, that was the final one, right? So they only care about themselves, not we the people. And that's a powerful idea. This idea that we the people are the government. We are this nation, not some guy sitting in a penthouse in New York that can write $1 million check. So those are 4 key ideas that I'm going to present all of you with a challenge. And over the next, we've got quite a few more people on than I expected tonight. I thought with the Fighting Bob opening and being a Thursday night that yeah, that's right, our sacred trust. That's a great phrase. they're betraying our sacred trust that comes from the Constitution, from our heritage as a nation, and the idea that we all contribute to each other's freedom is important, and that is a sacred trust, and it's a responsibility we entrust to our elected officials, and in a sense to these corporations and the people who make money from these corporations, because they receive a public charter to operate as a corporation. So these are messages we've got to start getting out there. So how many ways can you say this? How many ways can you incorporate these ideas into things that are not just about the John Doe? And so again, you'll be able to, you can cut and paste these from the PowerPoint when it's up on the website tomorrow. So it'll be easy to get to. But look, key phrases that evoke community and also tell a moral story about the consequences, so people can understand the consequence of our self-interest. And that's right, the system serves them well, the idea of greed and self-interest. So the first one, the key phrases are prosperity and freedom in terms of community. That's easy for people to understand. The idea of all the things we do together, and that's what community is. Fire stations, police stations for protection, sewers, roads, bike paths, hospitals, medical research, satellites, communications, you name it, public education. So again, the idea of community. And then you have things that can tell about consequences of greed and self-interest, right? Which will help undermine the self-interest frame, right? The betrayal of trust, as the comment said, right? The sacred trust we've put in our elected officials and corporations that we provide public charters to, that they should serve the public interest. And yes, that's a great idea, is to make corporate charters about public interest again. That could be an important step. And the fact that that betrayal of trust and the greed and self-interest is destroying our democracy. And it's showing that they only care about themselves, not we the people. So those are important ideas that I would challenge to put out there and really dig into this in terms of not only different issues but in different forums, to your legislators, in public groups or in community groups and things like that, and put it into practice in other ways. And I'll be putting more stuff in terms of the Thinking Points Journal and getting some more stuff out on blogs too, that are public. So, and obviously this is what we're talking about is what other issues or situations does this work with? And I'm sure you can think of some. And as it turns out, there was an example that happened yesterday. In fact, right after the big John Doe. Let me do a quick drink break here. Just water. So just after the Assembly press conference, I was at a press conference with the Association for Equity and Funding, which is a statewide group of basically school superintendents and administrators and financial experts who are advocating for fair funding for schools. And we released a study titled Segregation of Opportunity, and I've got the website up there, and I'm going to have it on my website tomorrow for the full study. It's not a long read. It's not a difficult read. It has some good figures because a picture is worth 1,000 words. But basically what we found in this study of 10 years of longitudinal data, we found that disparities in school funding from district to district, so because districts have different demographic students and different types of communities, because school districts are different, what we found was that the current funding formula is actually creating disparities in funding between different districts in a way that it shouldn't, in a way that the Constitution of Wisconsin says that it shouldn't, and in a way that is actually counter to what school funding should be. And we found some very surprising outcome, and that is that as our measure of funding disparity, and you can read more about it up on the web, increases between districts, 8th grade math scores decrease. And for those who use our statistics geeks, we controlled for other factors that were significant. So that is, funding disparity actually decreases math scores, and it's actually to the point where it can be the difference between proficiency and non-proficiency in math. So very important point there. Another really fascinating finding was that as disparity increases, the school district report card scores, the DPI issues, those scores drop. And that the negative effect of that is even worse in higher poverty districts. So it's a kind of a double whammy. And that says a lot for the fact that the system is horribly broken. Finally, a big surprise was a finding that suburban districts, which we always think of as historically more affluent, and therefore perhaps maybe they're a little more insulated from the effects of poverty, that they actually experienced a greater negative effect of poverty on both school district report card scores and 4th grade reading scores, and more so than rural and urban districts, which was a real surprising finding for this particular study. So we'll be getting more out about it. There were several media outlets there, and I'm sure once the hubbub over the Doe situation dies down a little bit, there'll be room for some articles about education funding in the state newspapers. But it brought to mind an analogy that I mentioned at the press conference, and that is so if you have restricted food from kids for 10 years, if kids are the equivalent of a school district, and then you're going to say to those kids, look, we're not going to feed you anymore until you perform better, right? After not feeding them for 10 years, so they're performing really, really, they're malnourished, they're horribly, they can't perform at all, and you say to them, well, we're going to withhold food until you perform better. That kind of idea for how to penalize schools that don't do well in test scores and things is horribly wrong. So, it kind of begs the question, what kind of system do we want for our kids in the future? Do we want, a system for the affluent and one for everybody else? Or do we want, great educational opportunities no matter where kids live, no matter who they are? So just a heads up on that. Go to the website. I will post the link tomorrow when I put the webinar up on the web. And thanks for all the comments. If you have any questions, now's the time. But there's been some good comments already, so I think everything's been pretty much commented on. And there is an interesting comment there about corporate charters, which I'll just close. Give people time to enter comments if you want, but I'll just close by saying that corporate charters used to be granted with the necessity of public. It had to be for the public good. So, I'll get to that. Yes, good question. I'll get to that in a second here. So this idea that hold on one second. Yeah, the transportation funding too. Yeah, that was another. He talked about that as well. But with the corporate charters, it used to be that corporations had to be chartered for the public good, and that would be something that people would understand. But that was actually taken out of most states, that no longer do they need to be chartered for the public good. That would be a good grassroots campaign, right? That corporations should act in the public good. It would be consistent with our messaging. So the question about Walker's transportation funding bomb that he dropped. Yeah, I mean, look, it's clearly an attempt to be consistent with, look, I'm a great leader, right? I have the good ideas. I'm doing the courageous thing. Unfortunately, the reality is that's borrowed money. It is, we're actually going to be exceeding money we pay back in debt service than what we pay to public education soon. So it's clearly an attempt to continue to frame him as the authoritarian, because my guess is what you're going to find is you're going to start to find legislators fall into line with his. Robin Voss came out. It was one of the questions Sykes asked was that, look, Robin Voss is not good with this. He said that the assembly's not going to pass this. But I would guess that as things go on, because of this Doe thing, you're probably going to find a lot of pressure for the Republican leadership to fall into line with this idea of, fixing the transportation budget by saying, we're going to do what's safe first and make sure our roads are safe and secure, and that's what we're going to do. That's our priority. So we're going to borrow this money and do that. We need to find a better, deflect attention, and we're going to need to find a better catchphrase than kick the can down the road. We need to find something that's more powerful that goes to this idea that, look, they're betraying our trust, by not taking care of infrastructure, right? That's what we elect you to do, is to manage our investment in the state in a responsible way that's responsible to the people, and you're betraying our trust by doing what is in your own political self-interest and in the interest of the huge transportation lobby that is, it is just a boondoggle for them. So, yeah, great comments, great questions. Thank you. So we'll say I do. I don't know if that phrase. I don't know if that evokes the image for a disastrous transportation funding boondoggle. Maybe. So we'll have to contemplate that. That might be better. And that's right. It's our infrastructure. It's the common good of the infrastructure, and right, we elected them to be good stewards, right, of that. So spot on. So hope to see all of you soon, either online or in person. And we'll look for the Thinking Points Journal come out tomorrow. And I appreciate everybody being on here. Really good discussion, good comments. And we'll be talking to you all soon. Thanks.